Chapter 221 Sinister Plan by Hydesgrain. Forcefully circulating more mana through his lower body in order to enhance his weightless step technique, allowed him to break through his current limit for a short period. His body ached and Jason had to grit his teeth to endure it, as he saw the bright sun rays shining through the entrance, which was barely several dozen meters away from him. Next to him, he could see a few horrified workers running past him with their mana core and physique at the Mesa rank, as the first sun rays shone on his fair skin. Pressing his eyes together, Jason felt uncomfortable with the sun rays shining on him because he hadn't seen any sunlight for almost 2 weeks. But this didn't matter for now, because the shockwave caused by the monstrous explosion threw him through the air into a bunch of thorny bushes. Groaning, Jason was glad that he decided to have Scorpio occupy his mana core because the thorns couldn't pierce through the exoskeleton. Trying to stand up, he immediately felt dense death mana enveloping him, causing him to frown, as he forced his eyes open. Dazzled by the sunlight, Jason could barely see something, but upon looking through the ground at the rough position where the explosion happened, he could only gasp. Nobody. His eyes widened involuntarily, and upon focusing his attention on his mana eyes, he noticed that not a single being survived, not even Lux's undead soul bonds, because he couldn't perceive any mana fluctuations from them anymore. There was only one fluctuating mana core, causing a terrified grimace to appear on his face. He is still alive. Lux seemed to be alive, but Jason wondered why he would cause such a big explosion, which killed every single of his soul bonds. Was that planned? He wondered, and until now, Lux seemed to have planned everything, and Jason doubted that this was not within his estimations. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a reason for him to wait for the larger groups of humans which hunted him. He would have approached them one after another to increase the number of his small undead army. The black cocoon around Lux slowly dissipated and Jason's eyes were drawn to him. He didn't even care about the chaos around him, with several dozen injured humans crying out in pain and agony while a thick death aura permeated through the air. Apparently, the area around Lux turned relatively spacious, because Jason saw him walking towards what was left from the humans that died, with the undead blood soul sphere in his hand. Frowning, he suddenly saw over 100 soul worlds emerging, as the blood soul sphere lightened up before it absorbed them slowly. What is he doing? Shouldn't even the bones be shattered into smithereens by the explosion? Is it even possible to resurrect all of them? He wondered, with disgust spreading over his face. But what Jason saw next caused him to frown, before his expression changed to one of astonishment, followed by shock. That is possible. Next to Lux emerged a tall human-shaped being which he estimated to be roughly a low unblemished being, while the color he perceived was a faint green, indicating the potential of a magical ranked beast. Because Lux could only contract beings with a death affinity, Jason was shocked to see an undead with the possibility to increase its strength, which he never heard before. But that was not it, as the undead blood soul sphere that gathered the soul worlds before, expelled a faint compressed liquid drop, which floated towards the undead being next to Lux. The mysterious liquid drop enveloped the undead being's mana core, which began to shine brightly before it began to absorb it. Neither its mana core rank nor anything like that changed, but thanks to his special ability, he noticed the faint color enveloping the undead becoming denser before it slowly turned into a faint purple. It increased its potential. What the hell is this undead being and this undead blood soul sphere? Where did he get them from? Jason was extremely shocked when he noticed someone dragging him away from the bush he was still standing in. Are you insane? Run away. Jason faintly heard as he looked up to see a young man in his 20s holding his arm in order to force him to run away from the cave. His facial features were above average, but the terrified expression worsened his looks. But who would care about something like this in such a situation? Remembering that he barely survived the explosion created by Lux, Jason gathered his senses to say, "Thanks," before he loosened the young man's grasp around his wrist. Even if the young man wanted to help him more, he noticed that the black-haired youth's speed couldn't keep up with a master-rank physique, which slowed both down. The young man was still terrified, but he decided to help Jason, even if it wasn't necessary, which caused him to feel gratitude towards the young man. After the young man saw that Jason came back to his senses, he nodded his head, before wishing him good luck, as he rushed after his own group. Well, it's better than nothing, huh? Jason thought as he noticed the group of master-ranked workers running around like crazy hens, without a set goal. He wasn't sure why he could remain relatively calm right now, but somehow Jason's mindset began to think of all kinds of things. It was extremely problematic to see Lux having the capabilities to increase his soul bond's potential by absorbing soul worlds from humans. Seeing how reckless Lux acted in order to achieve his goal, which was still unknown to Jason, he felt scared and nervous. But even if he felt emotionally unstable right now, his mind was working at an unimaginable speed. He won't attack the Highland Plateau immediately, because his soul bond is barely at the unblemished rank, even though its potential is extremely high. His whole army should be eradicated, which means he has to replenish them. As such, he will most likely hunt small groups of beasts or humans. Beasts are said to be harder to resurrect, but that doesn't mean the same applies for Lux, as he is in the possession of this weird sphere. The only good thing is that he can't leave the 4-star rift, just like that. Otherwise he will be caught and tortured in order to find out his secrets. Thinking about all of this, Jason remembered the explosion and his extremely aggressive behavior, as a sudden thought appeared in his mind. Does he even want to leave the 4-star rift? Has he a different way out? Wait. Let's think for a moment. Without any support, he shouldn't be able to get his hands on the undead blood soul sphere, and neither should any human, even the big families on Canir. Does this mean he obtained it from someone else, maybe a foreign intelligent race? Have they a way to bring him back Lux back, if he wouldn't enter the rift? We don't know much about temporary or even permanent rifts, but that doesn't mean it had to be the same for other races. There was no answer to his train of thoughts and he could only assume things. However, one fact was sure. Someone backed up Lux, which was extremely scary, considering that he was also a human, who emotionlessly massacred others in order to achieve his goal. The main issue was also that Lux could be said to be invincible within the 4-star rift, as long as his weird soul bond reached the magical rank within the next few days, which would be extremely bad. As such, Jason decided to immediately rush back to the Highland Plateau in order to report what happened, while he was still unsure what to do after that. It's probably the best to just leave, huh? Chapter 222 Valley by Hydesgrain. Even if he wanted to rush back with his highest speed, he was still in a 4-star rift filled with unblemished and magical ranked beasts, which hindered his advancement greatly. Additionally, their expedition team already took 2 days in order to reach his current position. How long would he take alone, while evading other beasts? 3 to 4 days were already fast and there would be no time for him to make reports or anything like that, because he was just too slow. Currently, his surroundings were freed from any kind of beasts thanks to the explosion and death aura permeating the air, but it wouldn't stay like this. Jason was quite sure where he had to go first, and he also remembered what kinds of beasts he saw before, which helped him to figure out the best path to the Highland Plateau. He could also venture along the mountain ring because he would end up at his final destination either way, but this brought dangers. The issue with the mountain ring were flying beasts at the mountainside that might prey on him, which was not something Jason wanted. As such, he decided to venture through the forest's outskirts while staying nearby the mountain ring. With his mana eyes supporting him, it was hardly a problem to avoid any kind of beasts, while his mind was still tormented by hundreds of questions and theories about Lux's behavior. The only difference was that now, Jason was forced to add irregulars, as he thought about the untraceable drakes he encountered deeper within the elemental crystal cave. Digesting that his mana eyes weren't perfect was already hard for him, but his curiosity overwhelmed the bitter sensation because he never heard of an ability that could completely conceal mana fluctuation, and he couldn't remember such a beast in Shane and Dalir's advanced beastarium. If he had such a beast, Jason could venture through the 4-star rift with much more confidence, because its ability would most likely be inherited to him, allowing his mana core to be completely concealed, which was even more advanced than the concealment technique Shane gave him. Meanwhile, Jason figured out that not a single beast seemed to care about his whole existence at all, because of his shallow mana core rank they didn't even saw him as a threat, which made it possible for him to stop exerting the concealment technique. Instead, he passively absorbed and refined mana in addition to his sub-area, which did the same, while remaining focused on his task. Scorpio still occupied his mana core, while its exoskeleton enveloped him, in order to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. Even if he avoided all kinds of beast groups, there were times, larger packs traveled through the forest, running past him as he crawled on trees to hide, while other times, he was dragged into a territorial fight, as he passed two hostile beast groups. Without knowing how he even survived, Jason was glad to have a mana grade 2 leather armor, which was consistently supplied with the mana from his mana sphere bracelet. Even if he was accidentally attacked by some fighting beast groups, as wind blades, earth spikes and all kinds of elemental passed him by a hair, Jason couldn't help but look at most beasts in awe. Comparing the variety of beasts within the 4-star rift to Asterix, it was as if one would compare a lake to the ocean. Each beast within the 4-star rift seemed to be unique, and if it was within Jason's possibility, he would capture all of them and bind them, which was unfortunately not possible. Since he encountered the untraceable drakes, Jason paid much more attention to other beasts' abilities, and to his astonishment, they seemed to be much more helpful than he initially thought. From regeneration to psychokinetic, Jason saw everything, and considering that he merely saw unblemished ranked beast fights, he was even more astonished because they devastated the surrounding more than the magical ranked goblins that attacked Syro City. There were multiple times, he was subconsciously forced to stop breathing because he was so shocked about the unblemished beast's capabilities. Remembering how their expedition teams fought against other beasts, the battles he witnessed now were much better to look at and involved a much higher combat prowess and affinity proficiency. Were we just fortunate to have encountered weaker beasts, or are such beasts rare? He wondered, and if he were to estimate some unique beasts' combat prowess, Jason wouldn't hesitate to say that they would be able to defeat beasts that were ranked higher than they. For beasts, this was already a decent feat, while their combat prowess also relied on the type of beast they were fighting. In most cases, canine beasts would be stronger than others, less combat relying on beasts, like mice, even if they had a higher mana core rank. However, it was still incomparable to what he witnessed, and Jason hurried away, as soon as he figured out which side would win, in order to not get dragged into other beasts' business. 4 days passed and his surroundings turned noisier than before, when he saw a few tents high on the highland plateau, while many adventurers and government workers seemed to rush from one place to another. Are they preparing for Lux's arrival, or what happened? He wondered while ascending the mountainside with slow steps. Over the last 4 days, Jason passively absorbed mana and refined it, while he additionally practiced the Heaven's Hell technique, when his surrounding was partially secure because he was ignored by most beasts, which wondered him. But even if he was curious about why he was ignored by these beasts, he wouldn't forcefully try to figure out the answer with his life on the line. As such, he decided to do the same as the beasts and ignore them, except when he noticed unique beasts that attracted his curiosity. In the end, 4 days passed and he barely slept during the night, where he couldn't walk around due to the bad sight, forcing him to halt his steps. It didn't take him long to arrive at the highland plateau, and once he saw all kinds of tents, Jason was astonished to see that the plateau was even more crowded than he initially expected. What are these people doing? Can't they decide whether to leave the rift or not? When he saw them entering a large tent one after another, creating even more confusion. Jason! He suddenly heard someone shouting next to him, and turning to his right, he noticed Malia charging up to him, with the deer siblings following her. Jason suddenly frowned, seeing her so haggard and thin, as if she lost all her weight over the last few days, causing him to wonder what the hell happened to her. Giving Jason a firm hug, she began to cry, confusing him even more, as he heard, "I'm so glad that you're still alive." Which warmed his heart, as he patted her head while saying, "It's fine, I'm alive and stronger than ever before." He still didn't understand everything, but he was glad to see that the others were fine, as he smiled lightly. Chapter 223 Shocking News. By Hydesgrain. Not trying to attract too much attention from their surroundings, the 4 of them went into their tent, while Malia continued to cling on to Jason as if she would never let him go anymore, which caused him to frown lightly. But he felt it would be worse to get out of her grasp right now, and as such, he decided to let her do as she wanted for the time being. Jennifer and Theo looked at him, not knowing what to think, because it was an astonishing feat to have survived the pursuit of a magical ranked beast while being at the lower adept rank. Furthermore, almost 2 weeks passed since then, and Jason looked like he didn't sustain a single injury, which was relieving. Thinking about Lynn and Lux's betrayal, both of them frowned and Theo sighed, as they entered the tent. Once they were inside, the four of them sat down, before he gently loosened Malia's firm grip on his arm, because it began to hurt due to his weaker physique. After he was freed again, Malia looked at him, as if she had been betrayed, and Jason pondered for a moment, before he summoned Artemis. "Can you consult her? You like carcasses, right? And you like Malia, please help me, okay?" He transmitted to her, and Artemis looked at him like she was disgusted before she saw Malia's appearance. Noticing that she didn't feel good, Artemis decided to do as Jason said, as she screeched, before landing on Malia's lap. Seeing Artemis, Malia smiled faintly, before she began to caress her. Suddenly the tent turned silent, and nobody knew how to begin their conversation, because both parties wanted to know what happened with the other. Jennifer was about to break the silence when Theo interrupted her. "Jason, I'm glad that you survived. You might not want to hear this question, but are you okay with telling us what happened after Lux and Lynn shoot at you?" Theo was more of a straightforward guy, even though he was rather quiet, and Jason liked this because he would be more honest as a straightforward guy. He didn't really have to hide anything and began to tell what happened, from his escape to him meeting the tornado wolves and everything that happened within the elemental crystal cave. He left out unnecessary information and the extent of his mana eyes, but the three of them were astonished to hear what Jason went through, while they did nothing special at all. Jason not only survived many perilous situations, but he also broke into the 4th adept rank. However, it was only when he began to talk about Lux that the surrounding became eerie quiet, with the dear siblings and Malia stopping in their tracks, not moving at all, as if time stopped. Without sensing the discomfort, Jason continued and told everything, without letting anything out, even the explosion and Lux's resurrecting the humans he killed. "FCK, Theo exclaimed, while Jennifer jumped up from her chair, kicking it over. "This Bast Road. Not only did he betray us, but he also colluded with foreign races. Where else should he get a resurrection technique from? I should have killed him when I had the chance." Jennifer's outburst astonished Jason slightly, but he could understand her somehow. From the looks of it, Malia and the dear siblings didn't know anything about Lux's evil side, even if they knew that he had undead human skeletons as his soul bond. Thinking that he obtained them from a death domain was easier to accept for them, than thinking that Lux resurrected them himself, and Jason thought that their first thought was most likely even the case. He should have obtained the resurrection technique later. Otherwise, the government would have noticed that something was off, even more so because Lux is a student at the Vanguard main school, right? Old Drake probably did background research, or not. Jason was not sure how Old Drake handled Asterix and the Vanguard main school, but from what he figured out about the old man, was that he acted rather carefully, which led him to think that he made a research about all students. But considering that thousands of students existed, the research about all of them should be less detail-oriented and more focused on the maths. Still, he should have done it, right? A death affinity is rare, Jason reassured himself and decided to change the topic as he started to tell the others about his small journey through the valley, which released their tension slightly. Even if there were additional perilous situations, the story he told sounded rather relaxing, as if it was nothing special, which caused Theo to smile lightly. While explaining, the others noticed that Jason was fascinated by all kinds of beasts and that he admired many of them due to their high combat prowess, unique abilities, and strong affinities. After Jason finished his side what happened during the last 2 weeks, he looked at the others with a faint smile, saying, "Well, in the end, it was a nice adventure, even if it was dangerous. Now that I told my side of the story, I also want to hear yours." And I already forgot to ask, but where is Lin? Didn't he run away with you? I should lecture him a little bit about his little betrayal. Hearing Jason saying so, Theo's mouth twitched, and Jennifer looked weirdly, as Malia's weak voice next to him said, Lin is probably dead. When we split up, he ran away with Lux. If you haven't seen the two of them together, Lin should be either alone within the 4-star rift or dead. I prefer the last. Nodding his head lightly, Jason thought that Malia's grudge against Lin was even deeper than his own because he didn't really bother thinking about Lin over the last 2 weeks as he had more than enough things to do by himself. Well, I don't think any of us could have ever imagined that Lin or Lux would act so despicable and sacrifice a weaker expedition member, just to stall more time. But even so, it would be unfortunate if Lin died. His wood affinity could have been a valuable asset for humanity. Theo said, disgusted by his 2 classmates, he previously saw as his companions, before he continued. Compared to your last 2 weeks, ours were less dangerous, because we rushed back to the Highland Plateau. Initially, we wanted to wait for any news about you for some days and leave afterward, but Malia wouldn't go, which forced us to stay there too. Jennifer and I just hunted a few unblemished beasts in order to complete our expedition task, but that was everything slightly exciting. We heard lots of news about a bunch of humans going amok, which shocked everyone at the plateau, and the majority of news were about the undead beings and a small army of undead killing beasts and humans at the same time. Over the last few days, there are more news about it, and it seems like Lux is on his way to the Highland Plateau, or rather the 4-star rift. Considering that the 4-star rift is only stable for another 7 days, I doubt that Lux will come here without a plan. Maybe we should leave, now that you're back. It's just too dangerous here because it's not only Lux who suddenly went on a killing spree but also another bunch of crazy humans at the peak of the unblemished rank, and their combat prowess suddenly soared. Not a single human within the 4-star rift will stand a chance against them. Jason didn't really need to stay within the 4-star rift and nodded his head when he heard what Theo said, but it was still somewhat shocking for him to figure out that Lux was not the only one turning their back to humanity. How far did the foreign races infiltrate into our society? He wondered as he said. The earlier we leave the better, right? Chapter 224, Fortress by Hydesgrain. Once they decided to leave, everyone picked up their stuff, while Artemis went back into Jason's soul world. Without wasting any time, he was about to go straight to the rift, when he was held back by Theo. Looking at him in confusion, he pointed towards the large medical tent next to the rift, explaining, "We have to be tested before we're allowed to enter the rift. It won't take that long, and it's just a simple blood test and another small examination to measure your brainwaves." Halting in his tracks, Jason was confused for a moment, before he understood the meaning of such a test, as he asked to make sure that his train of thoughts was correct. Do we have to undergo these tests because it is unknown if the valley has foreign, harmful viruses or diseases? But what about the brain waves? Are they done to figure out if parasites enter our body as a host to control us or something like that? Jason remembered having heard something similar, but he was not sure if his memory was correct. Theo only nodded his head, smiling lightly as he said, "Yes. There are just too many unknown viruses, spreading disease and even more hostile, yet crafty beasts within the rifts, which makes everything slightly more complicated. Because of that, the 4 of them had to line up in order to be examined before they were allowed to go back to Argos. The examination itself wouldn't take long, but they had to wait for a few hours in the queue to enter the large tent. In the meantime, Jason scanned through everyone's mana core, before he averted his attention to the passive mana gathering technique. When it was their turn, his brainwaves were scanned, his body searched through for certain signs of a disease or an injury from a beast to figure out if bacteria or viruses were transferred to him before his blood was tested. Jason was neither bitten by any beast nor seriously injured at the moment because his broken shoulder was already completely healed. His blood test and brain waves were also in the normal standards, which allowed him to step through the rift. Waiting for the others, they also seemed fine, and the 4 of them stepped through the 4-star rift, ending the expedition. This time, Jason wanted to stay conscious without fainting during their teleport back to Argos, and he calmed down to focus on his entire being, as the space around him twisted as it happened the first time. The other fainted, while his eyes shone brightly in the seemingly infinite darkness which was brightened up by bright shining stars around him. The vast blue planet appeared in his sight once again, but this time instead of staring blankly at it, Jason tried to inspect it more in detail. Like ancient globes of Argos indicated, this blue planet in front of him was similarly filled with a majority of water. There were many large continents, islands, but the biggest contrast between Argos and the blue planet in front of him was that the blue planet had huge areas with single landscapes that slowly changed, while even a single island on Argos had multiple environments at once. At least, Jason presumed them to be landscapes, or rather different environmental areas, because he could see white-colored areas, most likely indicating a mountain range or ice, snowfields and so on, while the majority of the continents were filled with a dark green and bluish-green color which looked extremely distinct, even from far away. But there were also black, brown, and even red areas, causing him to frown. Is that a volcano or corroded environment? Comparing Argos and the blue planet seemed to be less chaotic, which couldn't be said for Canir or any island of the archipelagos that were extremely chaotic from their environments, caused by the emerging of natural treasures with transmuted mana. Is this planet better in handling the natural mana? How? Isn't the emergence of natural treasures a coincidence? Is there someone or something controlling everything? Jason assumed just anything that jumped into his mind, and there was no sure answer, but his own thoughts astonished him because they were abstruse and without any proof. It was just his imagination, and time seemed to pass without him knowing, and his complete attention was on the blue planet they passed. Even if Jason was able to stay conscious longer than before, in the end, his mind trembled as he fainted on the ground, without being able to continue his inspection. Waking up, Jason found himself in a tent again, and it felt like a déjà vu when he sensed that the mana fluctuations around him were fainter compared to the 4-star rift. Ah, we are already back and I still collapsed, he thought while lamenting about his weak will before he stood up slowly. His head ached slightly, but it was not as uncomfortable as expected. Looking at Malia and the dear siblings laying inside the beds next to his, he pondered what to do, as he took out a piece of paper and wrote a short message, which he laid next to Malia's bed. They should find it immediately, right? It's better than nothing, Jason thought, and he couldn't waste too much time waiting for the others. In the end, nobody except him knew exactly how devastating Lux's capabilities became, and that he seemed to have no limit, thanks to the undead blood soul sphere, with its unknown abilities. Leaving the tent, all of them slept in. The sunset greeted him, telling him that it was already evening. Does a single trip through the rift take so long, or is the day and night cycle somewhat shifted or even reversed? Not knowing the answer, Jason decided to disregard this thought for now, because it was not that important, as he looked around in order to figure out where exactly he was. From his distance to the 4-star rift, Jason was sure that he was still within the secured area around it, but what he saw in front of him took him by surprise. They built such a thing in just 3 weeks. Looking up, he saw humongous walls with all kinds of long-range warfare situated on top, shocking him, as he decided to search for guardians in order to figure out what was going on. Opening his quantum bracelet, a holographic screen emerged in front of him, with hundreds of messages in it, which he however ignored. Most of them were from the Flays, asking about their well-being and that they should answer their calls once they returned. This told Jason that Syro City already knew about the dangers within the 4-star rift, and it was apparently also the reason for such a large fortress to be built in such a short period. His first thought was that it was extremely quickly built, but with his mana eyes and rational thinking, Jason concluded that it was built in 4 days at most, with the help of high-ranked affinities. But even so, it still looked better than he expected from such a huge, yet quickly built fortress. The first thing he did was messaging Shane and Dahlia before he decided to message Seren and the Flays about his well-being. After that, he immediately called Till, because he was the strongest being within Syro City if one excluded Dahlia and Shane, who lived illegally in Asterix and hidden from the big families. His call was still connecting to Till, as he noticed familiar mana fluctuations next to him approaching him with an astronomical velocity, as he hung up the call. Waving, he smiled lightly when Till with his white golden wings, looking at him impatiently. Jason. It's nice that you're fine, but can I bother you for a second? Old Drake and I would like to talk to you about Lux. Sensing Till's impatience and urge to talk to him in private with Old Drake in addition to Lux's name, Jason figured out what everything was about, and when he nodded lightly, Till picked him up without asking for permission, as he soared in the air without wasting a single second. Noticing this, Jason felt that Lux and the Blood Soul Sphere were not the worst things Asterix had to take care of, which caused him to frown lightly, as he wondered what exactly could have happened. Chapter 225 Imminent Threat by Hydesgrain. Suddenly taken away by Till, without any time to really think about what was going on, Jason could only look around, as they entered the area within the gigantic fortress around the Four-Star Rift, which allowed him to see it from above. The fortress's size was more monstrous than he initially expected and surrounded the whole district that has been destroyed during the Goblin Tide, which was weird. Is that really necessary? Jason wondered as Till landed in front of a large, mansion-sized, automatic constructing tent. Till entered it and Jason followed behind, without asking anything or wasting more time, while he was still astonished by what he saw from the inside. Apparently, Old Drake and the higher authorities within Cryo City were pressed, which he conducted from their Mana Core rank. Not bad. Jason almost exclaimed as he saw their Mana Core size, indicating at least one beast at the Guardian rank or multiple magical ranked beasts. In the center of the tent was a large table, which was surrounded by more than a dozen old men and women, discussing loudly with each other. Is Lux's threat really that big? He wondered again, as he estimated that Lux's combat prowess was at most at the Magus rank after the Soul World amplification. In that case, he shouldn't be a problem to them, and while they approached the small group of old men and women, Old Drake saw Jason, which caused him to jump up. Jason, you're awake. I'm sorry to bother you immediately after you woke up, but can you please help us out once again? Some workers at the Elemental Crystal Cave told me that a golden-eyed youth was present when the explosion happened, which released a death aura. I don't know anyone else except you, who has golden eyes and looks like the worker described. Can you help us out, please? We need to know what happened and where this death aura came from. Hearing what Old Drake said, Jason wondered who could have seen him, as he remembered the worker who dragged him out of the bush when he was deep in thoughts, which caused his expression to ease up. So the only reason for me to be dragged here is to answer this question, or is there more? He asked hesitantly, not minding that he wasn't polite right now. Well, if you know more, it would be helpful if you share your knowledge with us, Old Drake said, knowing that Jason's mana eyes might be exposed with that. Pondering for a moment, what Jason said enraged the old men and women at the Grandmagus rank around the table. If you want to hear everything, only Mr. Gryle and Mr. Drake are allowed to be present. Trying to put in as much confidence as possible in his voice, he could already hear thunderous, enraged voices revering through the large tent, and he twitched involuntarily. He was suddenly enveloped by more than 10 Grandmagus mana fluctuations, scanning through him, before they used their radiating mana to suppress him to show the dominance. Why are all oldies the same? Jason asked himself, while his body was pressed to the ground, when Till suddenly released his Lord rank Mana Core mana fluctuations, in order to sever the pressure on him. Old Drake, who was known as a calm man, sounded annoyed, as he said, "Out, all of you. What is wrong with all of you to release your tension on a 14-year-old youth? Are you guys bored or simply insane?" Looking between Till, who was the youngest out of the older generation, yet the strongest, and Old Drake, they could only suppress their frustration and back off. Glaring at Jason, they left the tent, before he revealed a confused expression as he mumbled. Did I kill their descendants, or why are they so angry? Till heard this and smiled at him lightly before he said, "It's not like that, but everyone feels powerless with the current situation and their frustration is killing them. There are too many accidents in the last few months, from the Beast Tide in Giro City, to the appearance of the Goblin King and now the appearance of the Fourth Star Rift, which is more like a curse than a blessing which we initially expected. To put it simply, the news we already gathered from the government workers and hunters that entered the Fourth Star Rift, we can only assume that either one race or multiple foreign races at once lured or even manipulated promising humans in order to take them to their side with special techniques or a large amount of wealth and cultivation resources. Jason tried to digest what Till said, and it was certainly true that too many accidents happened in the last few months, at least compared to the years before Till continued, "Now that only we three are left, can you explain everything?" Nodding his head, Jason began to explain everything about Lux, with his sole exception, that he saw his soulbond's color that indicated its potential changing when it absorbed the mysterious liquid drop. From him being shot, to what he noticed about Lux within the elemental crystal cave, nothing was let out, and when he began to talk about the undead blood soul sphere with its unique, yet eerie ability, old Drake gasped, while Till's eyes turned cold, as he spits out the words, "Shadow Walker," which caused Jason to look at him confused. In the end, he decided to finish his story, before old Drake or Till would ask anything which he would explain later, and their expression turned grave. After he finished, the whole tent was eerie silent for a few minutes, before old Drake gathered his senses once again. Sighing, he explained to Jason, "I think we have a bigger problem than we initially expected. Jason, you have probably heard from some foreign races, and to put it simply, this undead blood soul sphere you called it, is a special resurrection crystal. However, even worse is that it can even absorb souls and improve the potential of undead beings it resurrected. From what I know, such crystals are extremely rare and under normal circumstances, not something the Shadow Walker would give a human to lure him to their side. The only exception I can imagine is that Lux's soul world is better than we knew of. While he most likely signed a harsh advanced soul contract with them, in the end, this means that they can't let Lux die or be captured, because of his possession over the resurrection crystal and talent." Old Drake suddenly turned completely silent, before Jason could barely hear him mumbling, "They will come and save him." Gulping, Jason suddenly perceived an outburst of mana from Till, as he felt his entire being enveloped by a terrifying killing intent. Staring in Till's eyes, they were filled with wrath, guilt, and sadness. Fortunately, the killing intent and mana weren't directed at him and didn't put any pressure on him, even if his mind was filled with the desire to kill. It took Till some time before he calmed down slightly, to regain control over his senses and emotions. Taking a few deep breaths, he said, "We know now that Lux should be backed by the Shadow Walker race, but what about other hunters who massacred humans by suddenly gaining a huge increase in their combat prowess? Is there more than one race threatening us once again?" Hearing this, Jason was also confused. Humans were already at the bottom of the food chain compared to the other races who could annihilate them with ease. Why don't they just eradicate us and play weird games? Are they doing so to have fun, or is there a grander plan behind it? Not knowing what to do, Jason just asked out loud what he thought, and old Drake and Till looked at him weirdly. Didn't Shane explain their reason to do this already? Old Drake asked, baffled before two familiar voices resounded behind Jason. "Old Drake, don't manipulate my disciple. Don't talk bad about Shane, I'm also here." Turning around, Jason saw a spatial tear behind him, with Shane and Dahlia emerging out of it before they glared at Jason as if he did something wrong. He was happy to see them, but it seemed as if the opposite was not the case, which soured his mood further. Chapter 226, Canir, a breeding ground by Hydesgrain. Jason was right in between his masters, Till and old Drake, which made him extremely uncomfortable until he heard Till exclaiming overjoyed, "Aunt Dahlia, you're still alive." Hearing this, visibly confused Jason, as he lifted his eyebrows. "Aunt?" Looking between the four around him, he couldn't help but feel negligible, as Dahlia approached him in order to look if he was fine. Noticing how much mana was left in the unique mana sphere, she stared daggers at him, lecturing. "What did you do to use up so much mana in less than 3 weeks?" Which caused him to sweat heavily. Not knowing what to say, he looked pleading at Shane, who approached him too, and sensing the remaining mana within the unique mana sphere, he said reassuringly, At least you're alive, huh? I would hunt you down if you died within the 4-star rift. He added, and it sounded like a threat, which caused Jason to shudder, as Shane turned to old Drake until, he said, I think you guys need my help again, or am I wrong? We listened to what Jason said, and even a single Shadow Walker would be enough to cause a calamity on Asterix. Even more, multiple race envoys trying to save their new toys. Jason knew almost nothing about the combat prowess of foreign races, only that they were extremely strong compared to humans, but hearing that a single individual would be enough to cause a calamity on Asterix was still shocking. Does that mean a single Shadow Walker is already at the Lord rank? He wondered, but he didn't dare to ask, as he turned to Shane. Master, can you tell me what old Drake meant with the reason for the other races to not annihilate us, in order to habitat Canir or the archipelago? Shane was about to turn around when Dahlia answered Jason's question, instead of Shane. To put it simply, it's because of humanity's peculiar soul awakening, at least we think so. We have never seen other races summoning or binding beasts, and our theory is that other races want to learn more about humans by letting us live on Canir and the archipelago. They envy our soul world and what benefits they bring us, whether it is a companion, our soul world's amplification, or our affinities we can obtain by contracting beasts. We think the foreign races made some sort of treaty with each other to let us in peace, well, partially, while only interfering by luring over promising youths, as it apparently happened with Lux. In the end, these foreign races are still fighting against each other, while we're only seen as onlookers, nothing more or less. Maybe they see Canir and the archipelago as some sort of breeding ground, while they pick out our prodigies for their own gains. Who knows? In the end, we know almost nothing about these foreign races, and it is impossible to figure out the true goal, without asking them, which is quite problematic, because we basically can't understand their language. Dahlia said, and Jason tried to understand everything, while all pieces slowly gathered together, creating a greater picture. So these foreign races use advanced soul contracts to slave promising humans in order to make them into some sort of super soldiers. But why did Lux, for example, remain on Canir or the archipelago even after he performed the advanced soul contract? Is that some sort of plan to search for more potential human super soldiers while staying hidden? Jason wasn't even sure what he said, but after thinking about it, he was shocked, as old Drake affirmed his suspicion. That's exactly what we think is happening. Whether it is good or bad, we are still alive, and humanity could be said to have some freedom, at least to a certain degree. The only advantageous aspect is that the big clans and the descendants were disregarded by most foreign races because they never sent a stronger being than someone at the sovereign rank to be our envoy. There might as well be a different reason for that, but if there is, I don't know it. This also indicates that beings above the sovereign rank are either not common in these races, or that they're probably occupied with fighting against others on the mainlands or on their own side of the permanent rift. In the end, like Dahlia already said, we know almost nothing about the foreign races, if they came from the same place or if the rifts brought them together. Shocked about the revealed information he got to know, Jason sighed deeply, before he mumbled, so, we are only livestock for the foreign races. Not even worth their higher authorities' attention. Canir is our breeding place, huh? Jason felt suddenly extremely enraged, useless, and his eyes gleamed lightly, calming him down, as he took a deep breath. Looking at his masters, he asked resolutely, is there a way for us to fight against the Shadow Walker in order to capture Lux? I guess claiming and researching the resurrection crystal is the government's priority, and after that capturing the traitors. Pondering for a moment, Jason added, does anyone know what happens if more than one foreign race comes to Syro City? Will the city even overcome such a threat? If multiple sovereign ranks were to save their human subordinates, Jason didn't doubt for a second that a massacre would happen, because the foreign races were hostile to each other, which caused him to frown. On one side, it was definitely an advantage that the foreign races were hostile to each other, but on the other side, this hostility could also be the cause for Syro City to end up eradicated after today. Old Drake and Till looked extremely bad, and the gravity of their problem slowly approached everyone, while Dahlia looked at Shane. Shane noticed that and sighed before he hesitantly said, "In the end, the government has to forget about the resurrection crystal, because stronger shadow walkers would come if they're unable to retrieve it. If only a single foreign race, at the sovereign rank were to appear, I might be able to protect the city to a certain degree, but killing the shadow walker would result in us obtaining the resurrection crystal, which is not something we can handle. As such, I can't kill the shadow walker either way, and in the end, the shadow walker might even protect Lux with its life, because it is seen as less valuable as Lux. This means that I have to let Lux and the shadow walker leave, without obstructing them. In the end, if they don't attack the city, everything should be fine." Taking a deep breath, the main issue came now into play. The only problem is the possibility of multiple races appearing and them trying to obstruct each other. They don't care about us at all, and only the humans they contracted are barely worthy enough for them to look at. In the end, they would most likely fight with each other and devastate the whole city. Looking at old Drake, he seriously said, "Syro City should have an underground shelter as a capital, right? Send the citizens down. There is no need to cover this issue, and saving their lives is more important than anything else." Old Drake had already his holographic screen opened and messaged his subordinates, who immediately took actions, as a loud siren voiced through the whole city. "Attention please, attention, please. Due to some unforeseen reasons, every citizen is requested to immediately search for the next entrance towards the underground shelter. Please stay calm and follow the soldiers' instructions. This is not a test." Turning to Jason, Shane looked at him, as if he was about to give Jason a beating, which caused him to tremble for a second. "And you? Why are you always so reckless? You ventured through the 4-star rift alone, huh? Almost killed multiple times and barely surviving the explosion caused by your trustworthy expedition member, Lux. That was definitely a magnificent choice your expedition team made by choosing this traitor." Before a faint smile emerged on his face, calming him down. "At least you're still alive. But look what happens here again. Your youth is more exciting than mine was. You'll already see a foreign race and sovereigns fighting, haha." Trying to ease up everyone's tension, Shane tried to be funny, but the heavy atmosphere remained, causing the situation to turn awkward. The atmosphere within the tent turned awkward, with everyone feeling weird, as Jason couldn't help as he chuckled lightly, saying, "Master, you're really bad at changing the atmosphere. You should improve that after you brought everyone alive out of this situation." Quote. Chapter 227 Tension by Hydesgrain. It was still unsure when either Lux or someone from a foreign race would arrive, but everyone felt restless, and Jason tried to ease up the tension, which only partially helped. Even if they were restless, in the end, they couldn't change the situation they were currently in, and feeling scared, anxious, or nervous wouldn't help them to overcome the approaching threat. Weirdly enough, instead of being filled with fear, Jason was somehow able to remain sober, which was not something anyone should expect from a 14-year-old youth. If multiple races appear, even Shane is powerless and the whole city might be demolished. What can I, an adept rank, do against it? He thought while sighing deeply. Looking at his masters, he asked, "Should I also enter the underground shelter or remain on the surface somewhere more secure?" Shane pondered for a moment, and Dahlia used this period to answer his question. "Stay next to me. With my strength, I'm the best protection you can rely on at the moment, after Shane of course." While Shane, Dahlia, and Jason were talking, old Drake and Till used the time to message Max and Seren in order to call the two to them. Old Drake couldn't use mana and his physique, thanks to his injury anymore, but Till could protect Max, who was one of the most important descendants the Drake family had over decades, while Seren was Till's disciple and furthermore from a big family. In the end, Till had to protect both of them, otherwise, the two youths might die in the Sovereign's crossfire or something worse. Looking at Jason and Dahlia for a moment, Shane pondered what he could do in order to secure their protection, without attracting too much attention. Taking out a few items, that were enveloped in all kinds of colors, Jason was astonished to see what he presumed to be Shane's treasure trove. Almost all items Shane took out were marbles with all kinds of runes inscribed on them, while a few particular runes stood out because their composition was similar to the rune the 4-star rift was made of, even if it was only to an almost negligible degree. Is that a rune made out of pure transmuted mana? He wondered, without being able to ask because Shane began to speak. These items have my mana stored within and can release either one-time protection shields or single attacks at the sovereign rank. They're extremely precious and made out of expensive items, but that doesn't matter now, right? Don't try to attract too much attention once the foreign races appear, and only use these items if you can't stay hidden anymore. Even if I doubt that these races will bother about any of us and at most take care of their mission, it's always better to be prepared. Remember that, Jason? Nodding his head, Jason found it logical to be prepared for all kinds of scenarios, and when Dahlia took out a small dice with unique runes on each side, he was immediately interested in it thanks to its distinct mana fluctuations. We'll use the untraceable dice once the slightest sign of any foreign race emerges and stay within the protection field. Just take care of yourself, Shane, alright? Suddenly Till came over, with an uncomfortable expression as he asked. Aunt Dahlia, is it possible if my disciple and old Drake's descendants stay with you? I know that it's rude to ask, after what the big families caused everyone, but the children are not responsible for that, right? I want them to survive, even if I have to protect them with my life, if necessary. They won't be a burden. I promise. Till seemed desperate, and with every second passing, Jason could see his discomfort deepening, as Dahlia sighed deeply before she nodded. I know that you and the kids are not responsible for what their ancestors did. They can naturally stay with me. It's only unfortunate that we can't hide on Asterix anymore, once this is over. Hearing this, Jason's eyes widened, and only now did he understand what it meant for Shane to reveal himself, once he was forced to reveal himself. They have to flee again. ... Wait. Doesn't that mean that I have to flee with them? Comprehending the meaning behind her words, Jason was shocked, as he heard Shane talking to old Drake. Once this is over, let us have a good talk, okay? The other big families and clans will most likely search for me on Asterix, and it's only obvious that we have to migrate to somewhere else. This is not really a problem for Shay, but we can't take Jason with us, because it would be suspicious if we and Jason disappear at the same time, right? Sighing deeply, Shane and old Drake looked at each other, knowingly, and Jason felt as if the whole world rotated without him, which was the case. I'll be left alone, again. He thought, frustrated, as he heard old Drake saying. Well, that's less of a problem. Just tell me where you migrate to, and if we continue with the Big 3 tournament and he reaches a high placement, I can send him wherever I want, labeling him as an exchange student, and even if the Big 3 tournament doesn't occur, I can still send him away after a month or so. Don't think too far and take care of the next big step. Hearing what old Drake said, felt reassured, and he sighed in relief, thinking that he might not be abandoned, and it was as if a heavy rock suppressing his heart crumbled when he perceived a gleaming in old Drake's eyes for a quarter of a second, which made him uncomfortable. However, before he could even think about this, another thought emerged in his mind. Wait. Doesn't that mean I still have to leave the Flays? Noticing this, Jason felt shocked, as he subconsciously took a step back. Dahlia noticed his emotional rollercoaster, as she knowingly patted his shoulder. Life was not a playground but a battlefield of emotion, sometimes full of joy, yet also grief, agony, and much more complex than one might think. Trying to steal his heart, the first thing they had to do was to survive the next few days, and Jason messaged the Flays a few clues he received from old Drake in order to search for the best protected or within the underground shelter in order to stay alive if the worst-case scenario occurred. Everyone messaged him hundreds of messages in their small group chat about his whereabouts and well-being, but he remained silent, not knowing what to do with the torrent of emotions raging in his heart. Sighing, he gritted his teeth and thought, I have to thank them properly, once everything is over. Single quote. The next 4 days were nerve-wracking, with all citizens entering the underground shelter, not without forgetting to complain, while even the Magus and Grand Magus ranks entered them. The underground shelter was considered a large-scale base, manufactured out of peak Grade 3 materials and high-grade runes, that had to be constantly supplied in order to protect the individuals within from all kinds of attack below the sovereign rank. It would even withstand sovereign rank attacks, but the mana consumption was devastating, which forced all 80 million citizens to circulate their mana inside the underground shelter in order to supply it for a week. Over the last few days, only Till, Old Drake, Shane, Dalir, and the three kids remained on the surface, waiting for the last hunters and governmental workers to step through the rift, before they were sent to the underground shelter. To ease their tension, the three kids sparred with each other, but they couldn't completely focus on that because their train of thought was somewhere else. However, that didn't mean that Jason neglected his Heaven's Hell or Affinity martial art practice. With his soul energy crossing the threshold of 400 units, he was already satisfied, while Artemis and Scorpio's demand for soul energy increased only by a small margin. It was the already last day before the 4-star rift would become unstable when everyone felt that something huge was about to happen. Early in the morning, everyone above the surface suddenly noticed an astronomical amount of mana erupting far away from the city, while the 4-star rift trembled violently, with 4 badly beaten-up humans emerging out of it. Suddenly, as if the erupting mana from far away was not enough, Jason's mana eyes perceived that the erupted mana were initially 2 intertwining mana sources, which indicated 2 beings fighting against each other. However, his attention was distracted, because of a 4-meter-tall door made out of pure darkness mana which suddenly manifested close to the rift, as a 3-meter-tall humanoid being with ruby-colored eyes and darkness enveloping it, stepped through it. Everything went chaotic and Jason could only hear Shane taking a deep breath, as he mumbled, FCK, before he saw Dalir and Till's ashen white face. Chapter 228 Envoys by Hydesgrain. It was already astonishing for Jason to notice that Lux and the 3 other humans emerged out of the 4-star rift without fainting, which was something he couldn't do. However, the erupting mana from far away and the 3-meter-tall darkness enveloped being with ruby-colored eyes, were even more shocking to Jason, who subconsciously took a step back. He was not alone, because Max and Seren's eyes also widened as they shivered and retreated in fear. Each of them is stronger than Shane, Jason thought, with cold sweat pouring down his back. Shane paled when he sensed the erupting mana and decided to change to Plan B. If there was only one race that would take away Lux and the others, Shane would show himself, while demonstrating his combat prowess in order to show that he could fight the Shadow Walker if something were to happen, but their whole plan was immediately shattered. Not only were there 3 different races in total, but Shane was weaker than each of them, solely from the mana fluctuations they perceived. As such, all of them decided to hide, hoping for the best outcome. Shane would only come out if the worst-case scenario wasn't something they could prevent anymore, but it was questionable if that was even helpful. Jason's mana eyes flickered, and he began to seize the humans up that left the 4-star rift. The 4 humans in front of him had a mana core at the master rank, but their mana core's size was extremely enlarged. All of them radiated a dense fighting spirit, and it seemed as if they fought each other, which was a good sign in Jason's opinion. While Lux released his death aura, the man next to him was enveloped in a dense water membrane, in order to prevent being burned from the bulky, tall man next to him, who was enveloped in a thick fire film. Jason noticed that the flames were not only on his skin but also within the young man, which was shocking because he knew how difficult it was to not burn with flames within the body. But more shocking was the woman on the right, who had the fewest injuries, while she released a pink hue, while darkness enveloped her partially. After emerging out of the rift, it began to shock slightly and slowly dissipated, which was faster than estimated, and once the 4-meter-tall darkness door manifested, both humans with water and affinity stepped back in fear, while Lux and the soul women stepped forward. Kneeling down, the 2 of them greeted the Shadow Walker, that stepped out of the door, only to look disgustingly at the 2 lowly humans. Upon scanning his mana core, Jason paled. He has multiple solidified prismarine crystals. Estia Lauria Mulca. A hoarse voice could be heard, and suddenly Jason's eyes trembled violently, as he felt something within trembling in rage. Huh? What is going on? he wondered as the two intertwining mana sources smashed next to the Shadow Walker into the ground, creating a several dozen meter deep crater. The Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion race. Dahlia mumbled, with Shane nodding his head faintly, maybe we are fortunate. Jason and the two other youths were confused and began to shiver, when the shockwave caused by the two beings crashing into the ground, creating a 10-meter deep crater. These two also have multiple solidified prismarine crystals. He thought, biting his lips nervously. That's bad. Jason and the others, who were as far as possible from the rift's location, without leaving it out of their eyes, seized up the newly arrived foreign races. Seeing the two races, the two young men rushed towards them, before kneeling down. Similar to the Shadow Walker, they seemed disgusted at the sight of the humans, but they still had to follow their master's orders. Seizing the two beings, Jason noticed that the presumed Deep-Sea Scion was the 2-meter-tall bipedal fish-like race, with its pointy face, extremely long limbs, dark blue scales all over its body, and white fins protruding out of the back. However, the main feature of the Deep-Sea Scion seemed to be its extremely dense and distinct affinity, which astonished Jason, causing him to gulp involuntarily, as he averted his gaze to the 5-meter-tall bipedal being he presumed to be the Ganassia race. The presumed Ganassia was enveloped with fire, like the human kneeling in front of him, while its hair was replaced by flames. Its bulky physique underlined its size, and Jason thought it looked like a blazing giant. It had a single long horn protruding out of the center of its forehead, and the Ganassia's facial features were extremely crude, but the most similar to humans, among the three races, Jason saw, while a long tail with a razor-sharp blade as its tip, could be seen. Right now, the main task was to figure out how the relationship between the three races was, but apparently, this was less of a problem because the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion stared daggers at each other, with killing intent leaking from them, as the Shadow Walker ordered something in an overbearing manner. However, Jason and the others couldn't understand it because the Shadow Walker spoke in an unknown language. Liura Mijudwira. Suddenly, when he heard these words, Jason's eyes, or rather his entire being, began to shake violently, as his body groaned, while his eyes shone even brighter, gathering an astronomical amount of mana, without Jason being able to do anything against it. Jason, stop it. How can you absorb mana now? Dahlia said, slightly desperate, but seeing Jason's pained expression, she immediately knew that something was wrong. Ola Ador Chidarao. The 5-meter-tall Ganassia answered to the Shadow Walker, causing the pain within Jason to increase further. Wyriel Wyasu Shilakilara Elita Umelia. Wyriel, why are you here in this lower world? The Deep-Sea Scion said to the Shadow Walker, causing Jason's eyes to widen, while dark red blood oozed out of them. With him absorbing an astronomical amount of mana, the other thought that their position might be discovered, but everything seemed fine, because the races began to start a debate amongst each other, as Jason groaned in pain, lying on the ground, gritting his teeth in order to not shout out. Holding his head, not only his eyes seemed to burn, but his mind was suddenly flooded with letters and words he never heard before. Lying on the ground, Jason could still hear the three races talking to each other quite calmly with loud voices. I'm just taking care of my new toys, the Shadow Walker, Wyriel answered, and without Jason knowing why, he could roughly understand him, as the Ganassia sneered, aren't you the younger generation's prodigy? How do you have time for toys? Before Wyriel could even answer, Jason almost cried out in pain, as more and more knowledge was forcefully imprinted through his eyes into his mind. Without knowing what happened, he only perceived something deep within him shaking violently, which transmitted to him what he had to know. It took Jason quite a while before he regained control over his body, with the pain easing up when he noticed that the conversation between the three races turned louder and more aggressive. Suddenly, the Deep-Sea Scion enveloped the young man next to him, before he pushed himself from the ground, only to appear hundreds of meters away. The Ganassia swiftly picked up the bulky human, before he enlarged his body, with dense flickering on his body, as he pushed himself from the ground to appear in the opposite direction of the Deep-Sea Scion, a few hundred meters away, leaving a large crater behind. You two are quite lucky, huh? But you guys should know that we are now in war with each other, right? And all of us at that. That's quite a coincidence. Unfortunately, I was told to eradicate all potential threats, and if you want to nurture both of them, I can't let any of you go. Sorry. Well, I'm not really sorry about that, to be honest. The Shadow Walker said, smiling ecstasy, and Jason clearly understood him, without any pain tormenting him, which shocked him greatly, as he subconsciously retreated several steps. Standing up from the ground, his head was completely red, while dried blood was splattered on it, when he looked at the three races. What the hell happened to me? The others can't understand the three races, right? Chapter 229 Destructive Battle by Hydesgrain. Looking at the others around him, Jason was sure of two facts. One was that the others couldn't even remotely comprehend what was going on because their faces were ashen pale, fully tensed up, and awaited the three present races' arbitrary attacks on the city, due to their evil nature. The other fact was that Jason perceived Shane's dense fear, which he would have never expected, even if it was not something out of ordinary. Suddenly, three massive mana bursts revered through the whole city, shattering glasses as they pierced into Jason and his small group, who were the only humans left above the surface. Luckily, they were protected within the protection field, not like the rubble, stones, and trees that flew through the air as if they were nothing at all. Without moving an inch, the small group tried to stay as unnoticeable as possible, which was hardly possible because Jason attracted an astronomical amount of mana a moment before, while the mana fluctuations radiating from the protection field were also distinct. However, the Deep-Sea Scion and Ganassia envoys couldn't care less, because the Shadow Walker in front of them was stronger than both of them, which was definitely a bad sign. If he went all out, the two of them would definitely die. But even worse was that they had to protect their master's new toys, which they wanted to nurture into ultimate soldiers in order to let them conquer other planets and fight other hostile races. For these races, humans with their soul awakening had the highest possibility to become stronger than most ordinary races by using peculiar methods, as long as their soul was large and strong enough. As such, they let most humans alive, without caring about their fights against each other, as it would only make them stronger. In the end, they didn't want to die, and if they lost their master's toys, it would hardly be possible to survive or live in peace. Humans didn't know anything about this, except the few individuals that were picked up from them, and they couldn't tell their own brethren, even if they wanted to, thanks to the advanced soul contract they were forced to sign. Looking at the erupting mana, Jason and the other youths could hardly breathe, while old Drake was also having problems, due to his injury. His masters until seemed to be fine if one were to disregard the fear spreading through their whole body. Suddenly, Lux and the darkness-enveloped woman were picked up by the Shadow Walker's mana and thrown through the pitch-black darkness door without being able to utter a single sound. With this, Jason suddenly felt like the Shadow Walker smiled at the other two races, even if one couldn't see a difference within the envoy's expression because he was completely enveloped in darkness. FCK, Shane uttered, and Jason couldn't describe it better. If a fight were to start right now, the Shadow Walker didn't have to hold back in order to protect his newly acquired human soldiers, while the Deep-Sea Scion and Ganassia envoys were forced to hold back, protecting the humans next to them. Otherwise, their own mana output might crush them accidentally, if they were to fight with all their might. Taking one step forward, the Shadow Walker's darkness enshrouding thickened, as he released more of its almost black transmuted darkness mana. Lifting an arm, it said, "Let's have some fun, my friends. It has been long since I killed any of your two races. Let me taste this feeling once again." Not wasting a moment, the whole sky was filled with thousands of shadow spears and blades, following the two foreign races with its ruby-colored eyes, when the Shadow Walker envoy began to send out its first wave of spears with a loud boom clearly indicating its lightning-fast speed. Jason couldn't even perceive the shadow spears and blades accelerating before they pierced into the ground, where the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion envoys previously stood, creating several dozen-meter-deep holes, as the ground shook violently. Erupting with their fire physique and water affinity, the air around the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion race crackled, while the surrounding mana seemed to scream in anguish. The mana around the three races became more distinct, but Jason noticed the two young men behind the envoys, breathing heavily, because the mana around them seemed to seal off the oxygen supply. Even if Jason sweated heavily, he was shocked to see such a fast attack from the Shadow Walker, who stood calmly at the same position as before. "Let me see how fast you two can run." Jason heard when the shadow spears within the sky shot at the two foreign races, that were barely able to avoid them. This was however not possible, without increasing their mana output, as the surrounding they charged past, was crushed under the high pressure, creating large fissures. To Syro City's misfortune, the shadow spears didn't distinguish between living beings and inanimate construction, which caused several hundred skyscrapers to collapse, with dozens of spears piercing through them, as if they were butter. In Jason's opinion, this was the less problematic issue they had to face, because the shadow spears piercing into the ground, creating a more threatening problem when he noticed that they pierced through the underground shelter's protection as if it was made out of rotten wood. "Oh shit!" he subconsciously exclaimed, as Shane turned towards him worried, and seeing that Jason looked through the ground roughly where the underground shelter was supposed to be, he frowned deeply. "A simple attack like that can pierce through the underground shelter, which even I can't do without using my full power." Looking at the Shadow Walker, Shane's fear intensified. Forcing himself to avert his attention back to the battlefield, Jason noticed several bloody holes on the Ganassia envoy's large body, as he seemed to take out a weird device. The same device could be seen within the Deep-Sea Scion's hands, and astonishing enough, a high-quality holographic image appeared in front of both, while they continued to avoid the shadow spears. In front of the two envoys, another one of their race appeared, and seeing that their envoys were injured and exhausted, they seemed to look around, only to see the Shadow Walker, who continued to manifest thousands of shadow spears in the air, without stopping. Sighing, the 8-meter-tall Ganassia, with dark red flames protruding out of his whole body, ordered, "Just ignore the human we choose and survive, otherwise both of you will die. I can't believe the Shadow Walkers send Wyriel on a lower planet." While the same scenario could be seen in front of the Deep-Sea Scion, with a presumed female of their kind sighing, "Survive even if you have to team up with the Ganassia envoy for the time being. We can solve everything else later." Both holographic images dissipated, with Jason sighing, as he mumbled. Chaos descends, and with that being said, the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion looked at each other, and with a faint nod, they released their whole mana, crushing the humans behind them, causing their head to turn red with blood oozing out of their orifices, before their head exploded, with brain mass splattering everywhere. Everyone released their full combat prowess now, causing the surrounding to stand still, as if time stopped ticking, while fissures littered the ground. To Jason and the others, it seemed as if the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion would work together in order to fight against the Shadow Walker, which was the sole good decision they could make when the Shadow Walker suddenly said, "This is too boring. Let me fetch another one to make it fairer," before he surprisingly switched to the human language with a crude and rough voice issuing, "Come out, punny human at the sovereign rank, or how your glorious race calls this stage. Play with us." Averting the gaze, the three foreign races looked at him, with an astronomical amount of mana scanning through all of them one after another. Suddenly the mana, scanning them, flickered violently, with all three races involuntarily taking a step back, as their eyes, or what was supposed to be their eyes, widened in shock. Trembling, Jason could only faintly hear the Shadow Walker whispering, "Why the hell is a bastard from the Celestia race doing here?" Quote. Chapter 230, Taking the Secret to Death by Hydesgrain. What is a bastard from the Celestia race doing here? Jason understood, and his eyes widened involuntarily. Celestia race. What is that? And who is the bastard they're talking about? However, even if he asked himself that, Jason could instinctively tell that they talked about him. This was also because the released mana which scanned him had the highest density among all of them, yet he was treated the most carefully, as if he was made out of porcelain. Initially, the three races would probably start their fight directly, but the Shadow Walker wanted to have more fun, which caused it to call out Shane, only to notice Jason standing behind him. The Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion convoys were as shocked as the Shadow Walker to see someone from the Celestia race, but not only because their population was extremely scarce. It was rather because the Celestia being, they perceived in front of them, was obviously a halfling, with the other half being from the human race at that. They momentarily forgot that they were supposed to fight against each other in a life or death battle, as they eyed Jason with interest and greed. As if they were one individuum, all of them mumbled at the same time. The Celestia race can procreate with humans. And Jason, who was barely able to get a hold of his senses, perceived the greed in their eyes turning more distinct, gazing at him like a treasure and miracle. It was as if their eyes shouted out, "If the Celestia race learned secrets to procreate with humans, why shouldn't we be able to do the same?" Without knowing what was going on, Jason felt something within his body revolting, as his legs gave in, as the mana fluctuations that enveloped him were retraced. Shane took a glance at him, confused about the overly cautious mana fluctuations around Jason, but there was nothing he could do, as he said with all the confidence he could accumulate, "I'll be back." After saying so, Dahlia gathered her senses to shout, while her eyes turned wet, "Take care of yourself." Jason meanwhile remained silent, without saying anything as his whole being turned eerie tranquil, which confused the others around him because they were filled with a deep sensation of fear that encroached them. However, what they didn't notice was that he was eyed by the three powerhouses as if they wanted to devour him. Shane flew towards them slowly, which led the Shadow Walker to turn away from Jason, as he said to the other two envoys, "Aren't we fortunate to have figured out such a precious secret?" Ha ha. From one moment to another, the atmosphere turned perilous and eerie with the Shadow Walker issuing seriously with its voice turning cold. "Unfortunately, I can't let the two of you alive, and report this to your superiors, otherwise it might become a hassle." Saying so, the fully released transmuted mana intensified, turning completely black. Before Wyriel, the Shadow Walker began to move, pushing himself from the ground, which created a gigantic fissure. Shane, who barely arrived nearby the three foreign race envoys, was immediately flung away by the dense mana outburst, without him being able to do anything, as Wyriel's arms enlarged, turning into claws, slashing at the Ganassia convoy, whose eyes widened. The Ganassia envoy turned into a living torch, with a thick 20-meter-tall flame emerging from him, while his hand turned into a fist before he punched out, turning the whole surrounding to a barren land. Everything was demolished with craters and fissures filling the ground when the Shadow Walker's claw and Ganassia's fist clashed. Jason and the others who were a few kilometers away were also flung away, with the protection field cracking, which forced Dahlia to take out one of Shane's devices, which she immediately activated in order to reinforce the protection field. While Max and Seren could barely stay conscious due to the vast released mana around them, they took a while to stand up after they reclaimed control over their shivering body, while Jason didn't dare to avert his gaze from the fight a single moment. Clashing with each other, the Deep-Sea Scion envoy appeared behind Wyriel with a large trident enveloped in its natural completely azure-colored mana, which was mercilessly pierced into the Shadow Walker's back, only to notice that Wyriel already vanished. Barely stopping his thrust, the Deep-Sea Scion prevented piercing the trident into the Ganassia. Turning around, Wyriel's ruby eyes emerged from the darkness that enveloped the surrounding, only to laugh out. "Is that all? That's funny. I think it's time to end this charade," Wyriel said as he noticed a large compressed darkness beam appearing next to him. Trying to use his innate ability, Wyriel suddenly noticed that the space around him was restricted, preventing him from immediately jumping into the darkness which enshrouded him, and the surrounding several meters, forcing him to turn towards the darkness beam. Only now did he notice the human which he called out, before his ruby-colored eyes shimmered in joy, as he lifted his arm, with a 4-meter-long dark blue sword manifesting in it, as he quietly said, "Not bad for a human." Slashing out with his sword, he created a small compressed sword beam with its darkness mana, shattering Shane's beam to smithereens, as if it was a toy. Shane's smile froze, as he noticed the terrifying velocity the Shadow Walker's darkness beam approaching him had, and he could barely take a step to the side in order to avoid being split, as a blood fountain splattered on his face. "Shane! Master!" Dahlia and Jason shouted out in shock, wanting to help Shane, whose severed arm flew through the air, as he vanished into a spatial gate, only to appear next to his arm. Storing his arm away, Shane used his spatial affinity to seal the wound on his shoulder, for the time being, which it to stop bleeding. Not trying to think about the pain, Shane gritted his teeth, as he took out a bunch of potions with his remaining hand. Fortunately, while he sealed the Shadow Walker's space for a second, the Ganassia and Deep Sea Scion used this moment in order to charge at Wyriel. Using their affinity to their full capabilities without holding back a tiny bit of their combat prowess, they used their most powerful attack to annihilate the threat in front of them. While the Ganassia's fist was enveloped in a dark blue flame, burning his own high fire-resistant skin, the Deep Sea Scion's hand turned into an indestructible bright shining blue blade, as they encountered Wyriel, the Shadow Walker. Sensing the sudden outburst of mana, Wyriel turned around and was about to vanish into the darkness once again, as Shane used every last mana particle within him to seal the space in his surrounding for another moment. Noticing the space around him being sealed once again, it was the first time in an eternity that Wyriel felt pressure, causing its ruby eyes to gleam brightly. However, surprisingly he did nothing to defend against the burning fist and the indestructible azure-colored blade, as they pierced into him, with red blackish blood oozing out of the hole the two convoys created. A bright smile emerged on the exhausted Ganassia, Deep Sea Scion, and even Shane, who slowly slumped on the ground with a satisfied, "It's over," escaping the Ganassia envoy's mouth. Pulling out their fist and flat hand, the two envoys were glad to have survived, as Wyriel began to laugh out loud. "Ha ha ha ha. This was really funny, ha ha. You three worked really hard together, ha. Ha ha ha. However, it wasn't a lie to say that it's over." Wyriel's ruby eyes turned cold as they suddenly released a terrifying, overbearing crimson-red hue, with the darkness enveloping him and the surrounding several hundred meters turning black-reddish before the two envoys in front of him noticed the blood leaking from their wounds being sucked in the black-reddish darkness. With each drop being sucked in, Wyriel felt more energetic as his wounds started to regenerate, when he said, "To force me in using my inheritance ability, not bad. The three of you can be proud, even if I doubt there will be much time left to celebrate this achievement." The suction force increased, with the envoys' corpses shrinking, and they were even unable to move anymore because they used up their whole mana, while Wyriel used his remaining mana to hold them in place. Wrinkles spread all over their bodies, while their body shrunk further, with bones protruding out of their skin before their eyes dimmed. Just like that, two foreign races died, as if it was nothing special at all. That was tasty. Retracing the weird black reddish darkness into his body, Wyriel turned his attention to Jason for a second, before his gaze turned to Shane, who laid far away on the ground, barely able to stay conscious. Appearing in front of Shane, he sounded somewhat sad. "What a waste to kill a human, like you. If I had only found you earlier, you could have been such a magnificent soldier." Pulling back his large, dark blue sword, he slashed out, without holding back.